We are back on Morning Line. Thanks for joining us. The number 737-7587. You can write it down if you can't remember, because we're talking about memory this morning. Memory loss, the treatments out there, Alzheimer's and the like. Dr. Paul Newhouse is with us from Vanderbilt Center for Cognitive Medicine. It's good to have him on this morning. When we went to the break, we were talking about the nicotine study, and you said the way this is done in these studies, the nicotine patches, are these pretty much the same type of patches that smokers use trying to wean them off cigarettes?
Exactly. These are the same, virtually the same patches that smokers would use. And when we give nicotine through the skin, it is really very different from inhaling nicotine by a cigarette or vaping or something like that. It really is a very different medicine that we can use. And that's why we chose to use the patch. Okay, and are there some downsides to this? I guess I was reading about side effects. I mean, a lot of people hear nicotine, and if you go online and you can Google in there, nicotine and memory loss, and there's a lot of opinions on it, and you're right, it's still an open book. But I mean, some people are afraid to even consider this because of nicotine's connection with cigarettes and addiction, and I don't know, what kind of side effects can there be? Well, Nick, the side effects of nicotine are pretty typical. We know them very well after a century of research with this compound. If you take too much nicotine too fast, you might have an upset stomach or feel a little bit dizzy. But those are really the two major side effects. We've actually proven now over several decades of research that nicotine given by a skin patch is safe. It doesn't produce significant changes in blood pressure. It will produce a little bit of weight loss, which for some people might be good, but people's weight very rapidly stabilizes. There is some modest effects on your skin where the patch might be located, but we just have people rotate the patch to different places when they take it on a daily basis. And we find that most patients tolerate this extremely well. Addicting? Is it addicting? It doesn't have any addiction side effects. So it's curious to me, because I mean, as I hear you say this, and it is a treatment and it should be taken seriously, but something that potentially could produce a little bit of weight loss. It can be positive for your memory as we look at this study moving forward. I'm just curious why we haven't seen something like this more mainstream yet. Well, I think you've hit on exactly some of the reasons, which is nicotine is a compound we love to hate, and it's because of its tie to cigarettes. This has, made it more difficult to get people interested in this compound. But I think the National Institutes of Health, which is supporting our study, became convinced really through our prior work that we'd done with this with a pilot study back in the mid-2000s, where we showed that nicotine does enhance memory function and attention function. And they were convinced to support this with a major grant to do this national study. I'm thinking as we go through this, and I was looking at the background information we got from you guys about nicotine maybe preventing memory loss or helping with your memory in people who have normal memory even. And first of all, let me ask you this. I have a good friend who's kicking the habit. He chews Nicorette gum. And again, that's not a patch. He can also have patches. Do you have to have a prescription to get a nicotine patch? You do not. And that's one of the reasons why we know this is so safe, is because many years ago, the FDA approved nicotine patches and nicotine gum for over-the-counter sale. So if this study shows positive effects, we're going to have an immediately available, inexpensive treatment for early memory loss. And so that could have a significant benefit to thousands and thousands of people. All right, and so talk about this, if you will, then. There's people watching this program now, and someone may say, well, I'm hearing this doctor and all this is. What do you say to someone who's saying, you know what, I'd like to try to improve my memory. I wouldn't mind losing a little bit of weight. He says, it's okay, I'm gonna go buy a Nicorette patch right now and start using it. Yeah, I get this question quite frequently. And I say, basically, you should consult your doctor. Nicotine is a treatment, right? So the nicotine patch is not something we would suggest casual use for. So we always suggest, if that you're worried about your memory or about your health, consult with your doctor before starting any new treatment, including nicotine patches. And so it's not something we're suggesting people go try on their own. We're still working out the right dose and the right duration of treatment. So give us a chance, participate in these studies with us if you're interested, but don't necessarily try this at home.
Okay, and I certainly don't want to advocate in any way for cigarette use, but I'm just curious. In my book, smoking cigarettes 100% is bad across the board, except maybe some people would say it calms them because it's a habit that calms them down. But do cigarette smokers get any benefit with their memory from the nicotine they get from smoking?
Well, interestingly, we don't think so, and that could possibly be to two reasons. One is that the cigarette itself produces so many negative health effects on the heart, on the lungs, that it kind of negates any beneficial effect. And also, we think that administering nicotine through the lungs may actually not be the best way to stimulate the brain's memory circuits.
Very interesting. Let's take a call from Linda. Linda, good morning. Hi, Linda.
Good morning. Question. I think I heard you say that there was a test that could be run to see if you were in line for maybe having Alzheimer's or memory loss. My mother, who died at 94, we noticed that she was having some problems. It was during the beginning of the pandemic, so we didn't get to take her to the doctor to be diagnosed. But we noticed a lot of different things, that she was doing. My dad had a perfect memory and just recently died at 95. And so would I be a good candidate for having some type of a test run to see if I am in line for possible Alzheimer's or memory loss?
Okay, to see if she has that gene. It sounds like both of her parents lived to a ripe old age, and we're doing, look, when you're in your late 90s or mid 90s, right, most all of us, even if you don't have Alzheimer's, you're going to have some cognitive decline. It's just your brain got old, right?
Well, as the lady said, her father retained all of his skills right up to the end of their life. And so it is possible to retain your memory and cognitive abilities right up to the end of one's life. But there is some evidence that as we get into the 8th and 9th decade of life, that there are other things that can happen to the brain that may cause it to not function as well. It could be, like you said earlier, hardening of the arteries. It can be some other abnormal proteins that develop in the brain that kind of interfere with the brain's ability to signal. And so we know, particularly at the extreme ages we can get to nowadays in the 80s and 90s and even 100s, that there can be other processes other than just Alzheimer's disease that can slow down memory.
So do you have a recommendation for who should or should not consider maybe getting the test to see if they have that gene?
So we think that if you have a very strong family history of particularly early onset memory loss, then that could be a sign of maybe some increased genetic risk. There might be a reason, particularly if you think your own memory is slipping and you have a family history, that could be a warning sign that maybe it's good to get screened. Those are the kind of things we would recommend.
Okay, and yeah, you say early onset. One of the most famous cases of that, not just in Tennessee, but across the country, of course, was the case of the great Tennessee women's basketball coach, Pat Summitt. I think she had the early onset. So I think, was she in her 50s when she was diagnosed, late 50s? I'm not sure.
50s or early 60s, I believe.
So what is considered an early onset of this kind of deficit?
Well, really under the age of 65. So we have patients rarely who get diagnosed in their 50s. We see people with early memory loss that maybe develops before the age of 65. Most of our studies basically go down to the age of 55 as the lower limit for the age. But if you have onset of memory loss or memory concerns before the age of 65, we would consider that early onset onset memory loss.
So clearly, age and time has an impact. I mean, I don't know if there's ever been a diagnosed case. I suppose in this world there can be oddities, but a child with Alzheimer's. I mean, it may be very rarely, if ever, but I mean, it has to do with age. So you talked about, yes, there can be vascular issues, blood flow issues, but Alzheimer's, is it with time a buildup of certain kinds of proteins, not enough antioxidants? It's a buildup of something in your brain that starts causing problems, right?
That's right. That's right. So going back all the way to the early 20th century when Aloysius Alzheimer identified this disease that's named for him, he identified two abnormal structures in the brain that we now know are generated by two abnormal proteins. And those proteins are the cardinal signature of Alzheimer's disease. Now, we know, or we believe, that the increasing buildup of those abnormal proteins can cause the disease. It may not be the entire story. There may be other things going on as well, but we know that those are the two keys to this, and that's where a lot of attention has been on, can we develop ways to prevent this disease?
Yeah.
Is to stop those abnormal proteins from building up.
Okay, and when I hear about proteins, it just makes me think about something that's more recent than Alzheimer's, of course, but now pretty much well known is CTE, which we see especially in NFL football players. Is that a different type of protein? But it sounds to me like certain protein buildups in the brain are just not a good thing.
Right. And so CTE, that's right, chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or also sometimes used to be called punch drunk syndrome. Actually, that is one of the abnormal proteins in Alzheimer's disease, but it's different from Alzheimer's disease in that it's not both proteins. So we know there are rare neurodegenerative diseases that involve just the second protein, the one involved in CTE. That's called tau. Mm-hmm. And tau buildup can occur independently of the other protein called amyloid. And so if you have one but not the other, that's a different disorder.
Okay, and tau buildup, I think we sense that that's the result of repeated blows to the head. Concussions can build that up. Yep. I don't know if that's connected with Alzheimer's as well. I mean, blows to the head, period, not a good thing. But
not a good thing.
But
yeah,
I mean,
your
you
head
can
was not designed to be banged.
Right, but you could get Alzheimer's never having had a concussion, of course.
Absolutely, yes. And so we see the two abnormal proteins, amyloid and tau, and then in CTE, we only see tau.
Okay. So I guess when we talk about the nicotine study, and I guess there's some other things they're looking at, it's like they imitate, nicotine does, the naturally occurring chemicals in the brain maybe, all right, that could help treat memory loss. They get in there, does it eliminate some of the proteins, or does it just try to build up something else against it?
That's an excellent question. So it doesn't seem to interact with these proteins directly. What it's trying to do is to make a system function more efficiently, right? So the problem with these abnormal proteins is they damage the circuitry, if you will. So if you think of your brain as a collection of circuits and systems, like your car, the abnormal proteins damage these different systems. And what nicotine appears to do is essentially stimulate or get around this problem to stimulate the activity of those systems. We do have other treatments that may try to remove the proteins, and those are also being studied.
Okay, see, so you're hitting it from different sides. Are there other elements that come into play? We talk about blows to the head. I'm trying to think of things, the genetic factor. Are people, who have bipolar disorder or depression, are there other elements that can have a factor in terms of whether or not you develop, memory loss later in life?
So there are other risk factors. As you and I talked about earlier, of course, heart disease, vascular disease, high cholesterol, high blood pressure, all can contribute to the risk for memory loss, although whether they actually stimulate Alzheimer's disease is not entirely clear to us. But, you know, these things can add to each other, right? So, you know, a hit to the system can come from several different things, and each of those can make an impact on the brain. Diabetes, for example.
Sure. You know, I'm trying to remember. I may have the name wrong. I see there is one treatment, a prescription treatment that's constantly advertised on TV. And you have these testimonials from individuals. I was slowing down and I tried this pill. Is it Veralta or something? Is that what it is? Or there's some kind of over-the-counter, not over-the-counter, it's a prescription, but it's advertised on television. And it is out there, and it talks about how it's helped with some memory loss. Not saying it's a cure for Alzheimer's. Do you know what I'm referring to? And I may be wrong. It may not be Veralta. That may be another treatment. But there's something that's being advertised. What about these types of medicines out there now?
Well, we have some standard treatments for Alzheimer's disease that have been around for about 20 years or more. Those are drugs that affect, again, a neurochemical system, signaling system in the brain. They're modestly effective in terms of improving memory or at least staving off decline, but they don't really seem to attack the underlying disease, and they're not approved for use in mild memory loss because they don't seem to be that helpful. They also have some side effects and problems with them. So those drugs we use routinely, but they're not a home run really for Alzheimer's disease.
Gotcha.
And so a lot of us are actively involved in developing new and better drugs.
Listen, we'll take a break. It's our final segment. When we come back, Doctor, we're going to take some phone calls, and we will talk about some of the things that you can or things that you shouldn't do if you want to make sure you preserve your brain and take good care of it. All right, so we'll take a break and be back with that for our viewers right after this. Stay with us.